Welcome back. I have another brief update, and here's where we had left off before with the duck under section, doing a little scenery, getting the track in after some of the base scenery was done, as we discussed. And then we work into the Falls Creek area, which has the compressed version of Du Bois Yard. Still gluing down some cork, which is what all the nails and fasteners are, just weighting that down. But the primary thing I accomplished, which took quite a while, was the grade loop. I've got a temporary light hung just so we can see what will ultimately be behind the backdrop and an unscenic portion. But have a grade loop. Ended up being 2.5%. It is a 23-inch radius, and it works its way around and comes back on the other side of the duck under. So this narrow section here, it's about 7 or 8 inches. The other side of the duck under, which I will go over to, just has a similar configuration, obviously unscenic, that runs into the upper staging yard. So I've finally connected the other end of the railroad. Only have 2 staging tracks in so far, and the grade going up for the Clearfield branch to connect at C&M Junction, you can see in the background. But these are nice long staging tracks. I should be able to get at least 16 car trains with 2 locomotives or more, possibly. So a little bit bigger than the staging yard on the bottom here. As we always do, as you move forward, you learn a little bit more. So, but I think it'll work out fine. I'll just end up, maybe the first train of the day, I'll have to come out of the southern staging yard into an empty track in the northern staging yard, and then everything will be free for movements in either direction. So, going back over to the grade loop here, which again, like I said, will be unscenic. Actually was able to frame one side off of the 2x3 wall. The other side, it's hard to see. It's actually between a pair of ducts, but this one goes up. I have it hanging from the ceiling, and it's amazing when you put the bench work together like this. Had a little bit of give. I put a brace on a couple spots, but in both directions. But once you put that laminated 2 pieces of 1/4 inch clamped and glued together and screwed into the risers, it's amazing how much stability that creates. So happy to say we're finally to the end of the line, as it were. So now I can wrap up track laying and go back to scenery and structure building, which I feel like I am way behind on. But it'll be nice. This will open up my operations tremendously, because I was using Du Bois as the upper end staging yard, and that was kind of limiting. So it'll be interesting to see how much flexibility this adds, but I think it'll be pretty significant. So had another question from a viewer, asked about how I wire track, and I like Rob Bennett's approach to things. This is how I do it. This is not how to, simply how I use solid 14 gauge wire. Just buy at the big box stores on spools. Probably if I had it to go over again, I'd buy red and black, red and white instead of black and white, and I'll explain why in a minute. What I've found is that since you're using 14 gauge wire, using some of the terminal blocks or suitcase connectors, what I actually prefer to do to splice different segments together is I bought a grounding bar that goes inside a residential panel, and I just cut it in half. They're aluminum, but because they're built for this, you can get a really nice solid connection, and it's a restrained connection and also a very good connection. So I've been using those, and they're relatively cheap. I think they're, $4 or $5, and I cut it in half, so by cutting it in half, you get twice as many blocks out of them too. So the other thing I've been doing, so in a staging yard, if you want to have tracks that you can turn off, the feeders are smaller, and trying to get these big bus wires into like a little toggle switch is challenging. So I've gone to just using 2-pole, which is a double pole, again, residential switch, because the 14 gauge wires fit into them really nicely. This is a staging yard, so I just used a metal cover. But then what I do for feeders, you can see the red wires there, which is why I said the reds connect to black and the whites to the white. So I guess I could have just gotten red 14 gauge wire, but I didn't think of it at the time, and I just maintained a consistency after I started. But I'll walk over here. What I use for What I use for the feeder wires is just a big spool of 22 gauge, I believe. Let's see what it says here. Yeah, it's it's a humongous spool. I got 500 feet of it, but it really wasn't that expensive. I believe it's 20, or I think it might be 20 gauge. Looks like a 2.0 here. It's basically Bell telephone wire, I think. Works out really well. It's solid wire, and that's what I use for my feeders. And what I do for feeders, and it'll be on the other side here too, what I do for feeders is every piece of track gets soldered to something. And by that I mean, a 3-foot piece of flex track, I generally would put one set of feeders in the middle and then leave either end, just restrained or unsoldered with rail joiners. But then when you get into a circumstance, let's see, where's a good example, like right here, you can see here, between here and here, happens to be a real small piece of track in between two opposing turnouts. And what I did is I soldered feeders onto that, and then each turnout got soldered at the rail joiners. And then the opposite ends of the turnouts, I don't solder, just to give them some space to expand and contract. But that way, like I said, everything gets soldered to something, whether it's directly to feeders or if it's just a small piece of track, like a couple inch splice to make something work out the way you want. I think here's another example. I had a piece here, let's see, running from here to there, and then there was a small piece just to get it to fit properly. I guess I could have used one piece but spliced a couple smaller pieces together. I soldered that at this connection here just so that these little stub pieces always are connected. Another example right here, you can see the feeder wires just kind of looped up over the edge and soldered. Not soldered on that side, but it is soldered on this side. So I try and be thoughtful about leaving some joints for free to expand, and then all the other spots I try and solder to make sure, like I said, that everything is soldered to something. And I run, on all my sound locomotives, I run capacitors, but my yard engines don't have capacitors, and they run really, really well, even across the number 6 frogs. And I think that's partially due to the concept of soldering feeders to everything. The other thing that I do, and this is a combination of, I think Chris Lyon from CNLVN and also Greg from Fishplate Films talks about some products in Australia. But I am telling you, I am a firm believer in CRC 226. It is basically a plastic safe WD-40 and creates an improved electrical contact, keeps the rails from oxidizing as much, and I just take a little bit of this, spray it onto a shop cloth, and then put it, with my finger into the shop cloth, run my finger just back and forth over the rail, and as Greg from Fishplate Film says, you can definitely feel when a rail is clean or dirty and has just a little bit of this on it. You don't want to soak it, but just a little bit of residue of CRC 226 or a similar product goes a long way in creating really, really good electrical performance. So that's what we have for now. I'm very excited to get back to scenery, although I'll probably quickly regret saying that, knowing how tedious making trees is, but I do enjoy scenery, just not making the trees. So back to scenery. I definitely have some structures I'll need to work on, like PPC Lubricants only has partial siding. Pullman Standard doesn't have any siding. The foundations are painted. And then I'll probably make some mock-ups for, up here is Triangle Suspension Systems. I just have a partial mock-up. And then I've got the concrete block manufacturing facility where these cars are parked, and then a ready-mix concrete plant. So, and then also all the way at the other end, as we've talked in previous videos at Falls Creek, I'm going to have to make some type of compressed version of the Burke Parsons creosote plant. That'll be in this area. I think I'm probably going to do a portion of the building just chopped off. So I'll probably wrap a backdrop along the back, but then also on the end of the bench work, I'll probably just terminate, half of the building's roof line will just go into that. At least that's my concept for now. So that's what we'll have next. It's also been fun working on Du Bois and Falls Creek, now that I've got the sidings in and the upper staging yard done, I can run a local in that section of railroad instead of just the one that we ran down to Butler Junction a few videos ago. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll have a operating local on this segment of railroad, even though the buildings will probably just be cardboard. But more to follow, and thanks for watching.